Welcome to Virginia Quilt Museum Bi-Weekly Quilt Turning. We've got some more quilts for today for a little teaser, what we've got in our permanent collection. I want you all to hope you all enjoy, and then that way when we're back open, you all will be more than welcome to come by and see our beautiful treasures. Let's get started. First we have is the Bronte Rose variation quilt, circa 1815 to 1920. Though its official maker is unknown, donor Julie Blosser-Grandel says that her mother, the quilt owner, has always said it was made for her by a man. He was probably a beau of hers, though she couldn't remember his name. The mystery quilter definitely came from Rockingham County, Blosser recalls. It is highly unusual to see male-made quilts from the early 20th century. Quilting traditionally had been considered a feminine pastime, though sewing in and of itself had not always been exclusively feminine. Because women mostly socialized through quilting and sewing together, quilting became associated mostly with women. Non-utilitarian decorative quilts made as a gift for a lover or spouse were not uncommon, but they were typically made by women for men, not the other way around. This quilt pattern is a tea rose variation. While the four stems radiating out from the center are similar to the traditional tea rose pattern, the center layer flower is similar to the democratic rose pattern. Though the democratic rose pattern originally started as a pattern for women to align themselves with a political party, as women only just got the right to vote in 1920. The inclusion of this pattern in this quilt does not seem to be politically motivated. The traditional colors associated with the democratic rose are not primarily featured. However, rose patterns such as the democratic rose, Whig rose, and Rose of Sharon typically were elaborated and meant to be displayed. They were treasured creations and rarely used. While we may never know the true maker of this quilt, the idea that a man had made such a lovely quilt for his lady friend is quite heartwarming. And it's very lovely when you see it in person. Next we have the Isle of Wight bride quilt, circa 1840. It is 92 by 83, so it's a good size quilt. The Isle of Wight bride quilt is so named because it has been passed down through 6 generations of newlywed couples. The quilt can be traced to Sarah Applewhite, great aunt of donor Catherine Tim. Sarah married Alberton Jones of Isle of Wight, County, Virginia in 1813, and I apologize if I got the names pronounced wrong. They would move to Tennessee in 1828, where the quilt was most likely made. It was then passed down to her daughter Emma, who would pass it down to her son Henry Shaw, who then would give it to his daughter Nina Shaw Axley, who would pass it down to her nephew Irwin Shaw Jackson, who finally gave it to his daughter Catherine Jackson, the sixth and final owner of the quilt. Woo! A big family. Despite its Tennessee origins, the feathered star pattern, quilting, fabric, and aesthetic are very much of Tidewater area of Virginia. Because these were only available in Tidewater, Virginia at the time, it was believed that Sarah's family sent supplies to her home in Tennessee. While quilts that are passed on for 6 generations are still quite unusual, it was a frequent practice to make quilts to give to children or grandchildren. Quilts were treasured possessions for many families and would be kept for display or usage for at least a few generations. This quilt was accompanied with an undated handwritten note signed by Nina Axley. However, it contains a contradiction to the quilt's ownership. The note said the quilt was made by Mary Harrison Moore in 1765, not Sarah Applewhite, in around 1840. While this is certainly mysterious, the quilt is not as old as it claims. It is much more likely the quilt that was made by Sarah Applewhite. Now for our last, Elizabeth Neff quilt. 1843. It is 98 by 91, and it's got some great material in it. The Elizabeth Neff quilt plays an important role in the history of the Shenandoah Valley. The variation of birds in flight pattern reveals the quilting trends found in the Shenandoah Valley at this time. There was a frequent usage of triangles, peaks, and points. As one of the oldest quilts in our collection, the Elizabeth Neff quilt is in very good condition and is a rare piece of 19th century folk art. Quilts such as this one reveal much about the family lives and connections. As with other historical family heirlooms, it tells the story of the Neff family through its ownership and history. This quilt tells us that Elizabeth Neff must have come from a wealthy family because of the condition of the quilt and the fabrics used. We also know of her status from the letters she wrote to her friends and family. This quilt had stayed in the family for generations until it was sold at an antique shop in the valley, at which point it was taken to California. Upon learning about the quilt and its relationship to the valley, the Virginia Quilt Museum and the Shenandoah County Historical Society worked to raise enough money to bring the quilt back to Virginia and add it to our collection. Because of the local significance of this quilt, we have created a pattern for it, and you can buy it in our shop and make this quilt for yourself. All proceeds go to supporting the Virginia Quilt Museum and our efforts to preserve and mature the quilting culture of Virginia. And also, in 2021, when AQSG is here, the quilt will be on display. So keep that in your mind. That'll be in August of next year.